Okay, thank you. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're hearing from. Hi, everyone. My name is Matrika, and welcome to the second live session on the NEPTEL course Energy Resources, Economics, and Environment. Today, we are joined by Professor Rangan Banerjee, who is the course instructor, along with the course TAs Pratik and Chaitanya, and Sandeep, and also Survey, Mr. Survey, who is also the course, who has been assisting us with the course. Um, I think the format will be directly move to the questions which have been which you have asked on the link that we shared earlier. But in case if you have any more questions on the course, then you can put it on YouTube chat and we'll address them. So, Professor Banerjee, would you like to take it next?
Okay, I think we'll just straight away move to the questions. We are now, this is our second session, and I think we are towards the end of the course. We've just received two questions. So maybe Pratik, would you like to read out the first question, and then we'll try to answer it and have a discussion.
Sure, sir. The first question is by Hariram Hare. He is asking, recently India signed energy pact with Australia, and it is supposed to be advantageous for India's energy security in long run. Please throw some light related to energy policy of India in this regard.
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting question, and I looked up the pact. It's very recent, also very topical. So Australia and India signed the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, and this is India-Australia ECTA for short, on 2nd of April of this year. So it's quite recent, and what it does is it provides us duty-free access to a series of Australian imports. And so the key things from an energy point of view are coal and LNG. So the understanding is that if you look at it, see, we have India actually imports quite an amount of coal, and if you look at it pre-COVID, I think in 2018, 19 or 1920, the total amount was in excess of 200 million tons, something like 235 million tons. A lot of it is actually uh, coking coal, which goes for manufacture of steel, but even thermal coal is being imported. And some of these imports were from Australia, some of it was from Indonesia, and some of it from China. Now, Australia itself was also exporting coal to China, and there was some problem between Australia and China, and also in the Indian context, we also wanted to minimize our imports from China. So this will provide us access to more Australian coal at a cheaper price. So the cost of steel and cost of a lot of this in our power plants, especially those which are on the coast, have blended imported coal. And so this is what will be the benefit in terms of security. When we talked about energy security, we said one of the ways to ensure security is by having a diversification of the sources, and so that is one way. Also, another part in this agreement is to provide access to Australian resources and reserves of some critical metals, including lithium. And as most of you will know that, if you are looking at now storage and lithium ion batteries, and then this is also going to be critical. So this is an agreement, as you rightly pointed out. This does help in terms of enhancing our energy security, and so this will be useful in the short run. In many of most of our imports, if you see, are actually oil and crude oil, and this is mainly from the Middle East. And so the access to Australian LNG and coal gives us flexibility, and it is consistent with our energy security needs. We can move on to the next question, and if anyone has any supplementary questions, please do add on this particular energy security issue.
Yes, sir. So This second question by Rukibai Rabadi. In recent world, around 1.3 billion people are living without access of modern energy. Can we connect them? So,
So simple answer to that is yes. Of course, we can connect them. The more complicated answer is it's easy to say theoretically. In practice, there are issues. You can go to the World Bank site. That number, that 1.3 billion number, as per official statistics, now it's a little less. We are talking of less than a billion now. 940 million do not have access to electricity. That's about 13% of the world's population. A lot of it is in Africa, some parts of Asia, and Latin America. The ways of doing this is one can, of course, connect the grid, or one can go for distributed power generation. The problem in all of this is that this is also linked to livelihoods, affordability, and this is the biggest challenge. The other challenge, which is not so much talked about, is that of the total population of the world, a much larger chunk, that's about 40% of the world's population, almost 3 billion, do not have access to clean cooking fuels. So most of the cooking is still done with solid fuels, agricultural residues, crop residues, charcoal, and basically these have adverse indoor air pollution effects. They are not so much controlled, so that's also another issue. The next issue in these cases is that often what we do is, so if you look at our scheme, we have the Prime Minister has announced a Saubhagya scheme that's called, that is, the long form is Pradhan Mantri Sahaj Bijli Har Ghar Yojana. So that means we connected almost all villages, and now we are looking at connecting all households, and almost all households technically have been connected. The way in which this has been done is the initial connection cost has been reduced. There's on-spot registration. There's been a push to try and see that households are connected. However, going forward, we need to look at not just access, but substantive access. That means the electricity should be available, it should be reliable, there should not be outages, people should be able to pay for it. And that is a much longer kind of conversation. But in terms of access in the Indian context, we've made significant progress in this area. And the issue finally is that we need to make sure that the access to clean energy also enables livelihoods, and people have the ability to actually pay for increasing their energy consumption to improve their quality of life. So, anyone, Chaitanya, Pratik, Matrika, want to add anything to either the energy security or the access issue? Pratik, you have had actual practical experience in looking at rooftop PV. Maybe there's something you want to add on this in terms of in the field, what happens when you try to connect.
yeah. So, basically, rooftop PV is actually revolutionizing how do we give access to, uh, how do we change the energy access scenario in India, and connecting far like connecting places which are not connected with the electricity grid. It is like a leap of faith we are taking in terms of electricity connection. So we don't need any major grids now. We can just go and check what is the consumption, what has been data pattern, what has been consumption, what is the trend, and what will be the trend in the future, and we can have a off grid system there. So in these terms, the questions was asked, how can we connect them? So like something happened with the landline and telephone, similar thing has happened with the uh, larger electricity grids and the rooftop PV system, which are acting like one of the solutions to this problem of not having access to the electricity. So maybe yeah, rooftop PV is providing solution like that.
Okay,
Anything
let's
else?
move.
Yeah, Chaitanya, Matrika, would you like to add that?
No, thanks, Pratik. I think you covered many things out there. Let's move to the next question. For now, we have a question by Ranganathan Ramani. He asks, did HDI versus energy intensity feature in COP26 discussion to force developed economies to reduce the energy intensity of their economy?
I think this is an important question. Didn't feature in the way in which you have mentioned it. I mean, but it is in the backdrop of everything that is being discussed, because essentially these COP meetings are political meetings, and there are differences based on the countries and their strategies. So, as you rightly mentioned, typically, if you look at the Human Development Index (HDI), and we showed, I think, even in the slides, you would have seen the linkage between HDI and the energy per capita or the electricity per capita. And as countries want to develop, there will be a requirement for having an increased amount of a minimum amount of energy services. And where we look at developed countries, beyond the point, there is also a saturation. And that saturation means that typically what happens is, beyond a point, any additional consumption of energy per capita does not increase the HDI, but it's just like wasteful. And so energy intensity of economy depends on a whole host of things. And energy intensity of economy also, as we have discussed in the class, that it depends on the structure of the GDP. That means, for instance, a country which has very strong production of steel, cement, aluminum will have much more energy requirement. And one way that countries have done is that they have outsourced, they put all of this to other countries, so that these are coming in the form of trade, so that is the thing. But to look at this, the push from the countries, from most of the countries, was for everyone to adopt a net zero target. And most of the developed countries were looking at a net zero target by about 2050. That is what they had put. And the whole issue of a net zero target was, so what happens is, if you look at the amount of CO2 that per person that an average Indian consumes, it is a fraction of, yeah, I think I forget the number, I think it's 1.6 tons per person per year, and the average world is about 4 tons per person per year. If you look at Europe or US, those are much, much higher. So what that means is that as you look at going forward, you want those countries which are at a higher per capita emissions to actually come down to the level which we are looking at as a normal before you go to net zero. And in the process of going to net zero, we will have to make many changes, and there are costs of that transition. Okay, so if we look at, for instance, we shut down all our coal plants, we look at the coal mines, you look at regional imbalances, you look at cities and states where the economy is dependent on fossil fuels. How do you take care of that? And in the meanwhile, we are also trying to have development and growth. And so there would be jobs created by a renewable scenario, but there are jobs lost also because of the fossil infrastructure. And these creation and losses may happen in different regions. So the fact is that developed countries were, I mean, there was definitely a pressure to announce net zero targets. In the Indian context, the government decided that yes, we will agree to net zero targets, but we need our space to grow. And space to grow means, initially, in the short run, our CO2 emissions will grow because we will use the existing infrastructure and then make the transition. We've also made plans in terms of 500 gigawatts of non-fossil. We've talked about 50% of renewables. So there are many different targets on the way. And then we need more time. And that is why we've taken 2070 as our net zero target year. There was also in the dialogue, there was a plan that we will phase out the initial document agreement was supposed to be phase out coal. And so the Indian government actually changed that to saying we want to phase down fossil. And that is what got consistently phase out and phase down. The words are different. It just means the time frame, right? And that is what we agreed to. And when moment you say coal, means there are only a few countries where a large proportion of coal. The moment you become fossil, then there are many oil and other countries also who didn't want to have phase out in that sense. So we bought ourselves a little bit of time. So this is something in terms of the negotiation. So explicitly there was not this HDI versus energy intensity, but very clearly this kind of negotiation is very much there in the COP26 agreements, and these kind of dynamics is often there. Any other questions?
No, sir, we don't have any more questions on YouTube or on the list. Yes.
Okay. If there are no questions, then maybe I will just tell you a little bit about, see, in the last uh, the last portion of what we did in the course was on energy policies. And I'd just like to tell you these recordings were done a few years back. So recently we've had a number of different policies, and I'm sure some of you may be aware of them. So the one of the policies that we have is this scheme called the PMUY, the Prime Minister Ujjwala Yojana. And the whole idea in this is that we want to encourage the adoption of clean cooking fuels, and typically this is LPG. So the way this happens is that the oil companies, each district, each state has been identified as targets, and we've tried to see that the initial cost, which is the deposit for the cylinder, the stove, the first set of initial costs, it comes about, for if it is a family which is a poor family, and then there are ways in which that is assessed. There is a 1,600 rupees assistance given for the initial cost. Also, the initial cylinder is given as a subsidized rate. So this has resulted in a very significant uptake of the first cylinders and the LPG, but it is not. There have been issues because people, after the first 2-3 cylinders, many people have not been taking repeat purchases. And so there are studies of this, and you can take a look at some of these studies to see how that has been done. But there has been quite a bit of, this is one of the policies, and that is still, that scheme is still active. There's a scheme called the PM Kusum scheme, and this is basically for agriculture and farmers. The idea is that you can change your a diesel pump or your electric pump to solar pumping, and then there are incentives given for that. You can also look at having, with that you can also provide your surplus power into the local grid. You could also have a grid connected renewables as an additional benefit, and you can have an ESCO model where a company comes in and supplies and takes the agriculture and also provides for pumping. So that's, again, there are targets in terms of a large number of installations, and of course this is still early days for this scheme. We are not sure how much has actually happened. The other thing that you will find is on electric vehicles. Today, in terms of new sales, electric vehicles are relatively low. It's just about 1%, 1.3% of new sales. But there is a focus on this. There's an exemption from customs duty on all electric vehicle parts. Electric vehicle manufacturer, there is a special capital subsidy depending on where the in unit is, 20 to 25%. Most states have announced EV policies, including exemption from road tax, looking at the EV charging infrastructure, and we have to really see how this grows as it goes. We've also seen recently and this has not yet happened, that there will be a thrust on the national hydrogen mission. And the Prime Minister announced on August 15, 2021, that we will be launching this mission, and the idea is to make India a green hub for green hydrogen production and export. There have so far the policies have not yet been completely announced, but there is an announcement from the Ministry of Power where this green hydrogen, if some company is producing, it will be exempt from the interstate transmission charge, and it can also be provided as open access to the renewable energy generators. There is going to be some incentive with a production link scheme for green hydrogen to be blended with natural gas in the pipelines. So the whole idea is that you use these incentives in order to stimulate and create sufficient interest in the hydrogen market, and that's another way in which we are thinking in terms of that. So if you look at policies, we have different kinds of policy instruments. One can actually just provide a subsidy, one can create a mandate, one can provide information, or one can provide for the initial startups and phase outs. One can actually support it completely. There are also different types of nudges that one can do. So we've seen a lot of these happening, and you would see in the lecture that we talked about what has happened with industry, with the perform, achieve, and trade. We've seen with PV and wind, we've had this success in reverse bidding, as well as providing large renewable parks. We've also seen risk guarantees, and we've seen innovative financing and the escrow account and the lease model. And now we are also seeing, we want to be Atmanirbhar. And so the idea is to have production linked incentive schemes. And so a lot of this is being tried, and some of these are successful, some of these are partially successful. We have to wait and see. We'll always see. So as you look at it, if you are an innovator or you are a researcher, understanding and seeing the policy domain and how it affects your technology choice is important as you go forward. So if there are any Chaitanya, Pratik, Matrika, anything you want to add on this policy framework or anything else? Chaitanya, anything you want to talk about the market, the electricity and renewable market, which is there? Because we didn't talk about it much in our course, but maybe relevant for people.
Yes, sir. I mean, recently we did see the introduction of green day ahead markets in October of 2021, where the people can buy electricity from renewable sources, bid for those initially, and then after that they can take the rest of their demand from the usual day ahead market. That was one new thing that happened in the past year. Apart from that, I can also say that the real-time market was also introduced after we recorded the lectures. So the real-time electricity markets were also there.
So maybe Chaitanya, if you can just explain a little bit about how this works, the market, when the bids are obtained, and that may be of
Sure.
relevance to people.
Sure, sir. So in the electricity market, there's a day-ahead market where people can buy electricity for tomorrow, today. So they bid for the electricity that they want tomorrow. They can buy. They can bid for it today. They can submit their bids. Sellers can submit what they'll sell it for. Buyers can sell what they'll buy it for, and a price is obtained. And such a market exists for the day ahead. And when the electricity has been dispatched, there's also an option for you to buy electricity or sell electricity 2 hours just before the actual dispatch, so that you can correct for any mismatch in your demand and supply. So that is where your real-time markets come in.
And as of now, it's a small proportion of the total which is going into the markets. But it's still, in terms of absolute volumes, it's quite a significant amount. Isn't it, Chaitanya? You have a sense of those numbers?
Yes, sir. I mean, it's only about 5 to 6% of the total supply. The bigger chunk is still from power purchase agreements.
Okay. Thanks. Matrika, are there any other questions on the
Sir,
YouTube?
I have to. Yeah.
Yeah, Pratik, go ahead.
So I wanted to talk about this green power tariff that Tata Power has introduced in Maharashtra. Introduced in the sense they got approval from the regulatory commission. So anyone who is committed to the environment and who don't want their power coming from fossil fuel, they can actually pay around I guess 60 paise per kilo per unit extra in their bill, and they can get the 100% green power. So it is actually a initiative, a good initiative for companies like who claim that they are sourced by the green electricity. So this is a new kind of policy instrument being created, and in the market private discom has come up with this idea and they got approval from the regulatory commission. So yeah, this is
Yeah,
what I wanted to say. Yeah.
that's happened globally because
Yeah.
often the consumers make that choice. They
Yeah.
are willing to pay an additional amount because they ensure that they are getting green power.
Yes, and now
I
that
think
is available in like
that's
India, like for
available
the
in the
first time.
Indian
Yeah,
country.
yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Yes. Sir, would you like to throw some light on like NSEM exam? Like I'm sure many of the students would be interested to hear about the pattern of the structure of the NSEM paper.
So the NSEM pattern is we will have if you should basically look at the whatever has been there in the lectures and the assignments. So we'll have MCQs, and we have about I think it's the model is about 30 MCQs with multiple choices on the entire set, and then we have the longer answer questions. Again, these are also in terms of options or fill in the blanks where you have to do some calculations. You will have a formula sheet and a calculator. But this is very patterned and very much similar to whatever has been done in the past, as well as you looked at one. We had one question paper, old question paper that we solved. It's basically that, and for each part there would be so that is the kind of thing. It's very predictable, and you shouldn't worry about it, but you need to be able to do some basic numbers based on whatever has been done in all the lectures. So that is the way in which that happens.
Thank you, sir. That would help students to prepare for the
Yeah,
exams.
yeah.
Matrika, over to you.
Since we don't have any more questions, I don't see any more questions on YouTube. So, does that mean we wrap this up? And in case if you have any further questions on what was discussed today or anything related to the course itself, you can always put it on forum and we will be answering them to you.
Similarly, for the NSEM exam also, before
So,
the exam, when you start revising your things and you may have some queries on some of the things, please feel free to put it on the forum and we will
yeah,
try to respond in time.
sure. We'll be addressing them.
Yeah.
Right then. I guess we can end the live session now since there are no more questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.